Greetings, beautiful family. Wow, it's been a few days of, you know, the thought in the field, in the consciousness, in the blackness, the space of reading chapter 2. And that's what we're going to do. Shall we commence? Chapter 2 of Slim Spurling's universe. Ring 2, the early discoveries. I never came upon any of my discoveries through the process of rational thinking. Albert Einstein. Long before any hard scientific tests were performed to measure the effects of the light life tools, there were a myriad of discoveries that were made as a matter of course during their development. These unofficial observations are just as significant and say as much about the tools and their effects as all of the official data that came later. What follows is a compilation of information that was gathered during the early years of research into the true nature of this technology. While none of it is necessarily hard scientific proof, real knowledge is not always acquired by confining oneself exclusively to what is written in books or what goes on in the laboratory. So much of what we learn about anything comes to us through field work and hands-on experience. When that information gets added to what is scientifically provable, it widens our understanding significantly. Slim and Bill's early discoveries were phenomenal, and there's enough substance to all of them to warrant including some of them here. Early discoveries relating to the caduceus coil. Slim and Bill built their first caduceus rod in about 20 minutes using an iron rod and a discarded lamp cord. They plugged it into a power source and began doing experiments on ordinary Denver tap water. Directing their caduceus beam through a jar of water overnight precipitated several milligrams of visible metals and minerals. These consisted mostly of quartz and feldspars, with panable metals trailing behind the lighter fractions. Isolating these precipitates, they found gold, silver, copper, zinc, and enough mercury to make the water hazardous to anyone drinking it. To eliminate the possibility that the precipitates were coming from the pipes, they filtered the water through several coffee filters before treating it with the caduceus coil. Up to 12 jars of filtered tap water in a row could be treated by running the beam through all of them overnight. An equal amount of precipitate appeared in each jar. It appeared that the caduceus beam had the capacity to penetrate over a distance through glass and water. This experiment was repeated daily over a 6-month period with consistent results. They later found that the force coming out of the rod could penetrate a concrete wall and still have the same effect on water, producing the same amount of precipitate in each container. Hodgkin's disease. After Slim and Bill realized that water treated with the caduceus coil had healing properties, they knew that they had to create a beam with a larger cross-section. This realization led to the discovery of the first version of the light life ring. This one differed from later ones in that it had a positive and negative side to it. One side produced a positive and the other a negative effect. When they placed a gallon of water in the positive field of the ring, they found that the aura of the water expanded from about 1 inch untreated to about 4 feet when treated. This increase in energy occurred instantaneously, which meant that it no longer took 12 hours to produce potentized water. They did long-term experiments drinking the water themselves and offering it to people who suffered from various ailments, from multiple sclerosis to Hodgkin's disease. The Hodgkin's disease patient was a powerful attorney who had plenty of insurance coverage and had undergone every possible medical test. When they heard that he was already scheduled for bone marrow surgery, Slim and Bill suggested that he try drinking the ring-treated water. After about 6 weeks on the water treatment, the man underwent more tests and the doctors found nothing wrong. Since there was no way for them to account for this miracle, they explained it away by calling it a misdiagnosis. Their misdiagnosis had cost this man 2 rounds of chemotherapy and radiation treatments. He lost all of his hair, not to mention time at work, and was extremely debilitated. As he continued to drink the water, his condition improved, and he eventually cured himself of Hodgkin's disease. This case introduced Slim and Bill to the real healing potential of water treated with the Light Life ring. The ammonia event. The early prototype of the ring had either a positive or negative effect, depending on which side was facing up. A trained clairvoyant easily sees a golden glow or bright golden light emanating from the positive side of the ring. In their experiments, Slim and Bill always carefully marked the positive side so as to eliminate any possibility of creating negative or destructive effects. During this period of time, Slim and Bill had a number of large-scale hazardous chemical reactions going on in the laboratory. Slim was inhaling toxic ammonium sulfide fumes daily, and his health began to decline. One day, in total disgust with all the poison he was inhaling, he laid a 2x4 over one of the 250-gallon tanks of ammonia solution and placed a ring on top of it, with the positive side facing down. The ring remained on the tank overnight, and Slim was amazed the next morning to find that there was no fumes emanating from the solution in the treated tank. The lab still smelled of ammonia gas because the second that had not been treated, but there was no trace of odor coming from the tank with the ring on it. This was one of those white crows that flies through a laboratory now and then to point the research and discovery process toward the truth. Excited by this anomaly, Slim quickly called it to Bill and Chuck's attention, but they were not the least bit impressed and chalked up the absence of fumes to evaporation. Angered at their indifference to what in his mind was a major discovery, Slim got up on the car walk next to the untreated tank, and using only his hands and a lot of emotion, he drove a bolt of his own energy into the tank. Then he walked outside to calm down a bit. When he re-entered the lab a few minutes later, lo and behold, there were absolutely no toxic fumes coming out of the second tank either. All of us have the capacity to output transmutational energy. We aren't taught this in school, but it's an aspect of our beingness that can be developed if there is a desire to do it. As Slim puts it, he is fairly well trained in the use of this energy and knows how to tap it whenever he needs, and he is adept in its use for healing purposes or for making changes of state, whether of states of matter or of physical, mental, or emotional states. Let's all take a deep breath. Let it go. Again through the nose. And anchor into the presence of God here and now. The ammonia event proved to Slim that there is a definite connection between the normal human energy field, or the ability of the human animal to emit transmutational energy, and the energy field of the ring. That event demonstrated to him that the life energy in the ring is identical to the life energy inherent in the human energy field. The fact that the toxins in the tanks were eliminated both by the ring and through the use of his will acting through his own energy field made him realize that toxins can be neutralized by life energy. It's such a simple concept, but all of the secrets of the universe are ultimately quite simple. When you get right down to it, what Slim learned that day in the lab was that the life force, or the God force, is the active component inside the tensor field of the ring. He also learned that this force can change anything for the better. Extending this realization to the harmonizer technology that came a few years later, Slim and Bill found that they could create beneficial changes in the state of the environment at large over a significant range. The large-scale field effect of the harmonizers amplified by frequencies was found to eliminate air pollution, reduce crime statistics, and increase the growth of plants and other living organisms. At the time, none of them completely understood the ammonia event. It was definitely a discovery of some scientific significance, and only in retrospect has Slim been able to make certain statements about it. It marked the beginning of a research project that continues to this day. That research has been funded by the understanding that there is a direct correspondence between the presence or use of a ring or coil and improving conditions in states of living organisms, whether they be plant or animal. Positive and negative effects. The original rings consisted of just a single piece of copper wire. A single wire ring produces two fields of opposite polarities, one on either side of the plane of each ring. Slim and Bill were always careful to douse each ring with a pendulum to determine which side was plus or minus. The positive side always produced a clockwise spin, and the negative side would cause the pendulum to spin to the left, or counterclockwise. It is important here to understand that this particular idea of positive and negative is not related to electrical polarities. In this case, the positive field of the ring produces positive effects, and the negative field produces negative effects. To observe these effects, they conducted some simple empirical tests. Slim inoculated ready-made petri dishes cultures with samples of ordinary house dust. He placed one plate in the positive field of a ring for an hour, a second plate in the negative field for an hour, and used a third plate as a control. These were then incubated in a hot box, a homemade chamber for maintaining an even temperature. Overnight, the culture that had been treated in the negative field of the ring was completely filled with a black fungus known as mucor, along with 3 or 4 less aggressive species of fungus. The control dish showed a minor growth of 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. The dish that had been placed in the positive field of the ring showed specimens that were quite distinct, which, even after 2 weeks of culture, however, grew no larger than a small fingernail. It appeared that the growth rate of organisms like bacteria associated with ordinary decay was deterred or suppressed by the positive energy coming out of the positive side of the ring, and it was just as clear that the negative side of the ring caused the same organisms to grow with extraordinary vigor. They undertook another test using water. A Dixie cup full of water was set inside the positive field of a ring, the positive field, and a second sample was placed alongside it, outside the ring a few feet away. Both samples were marked and placed in the freezer for as long as it took them to turn to ice. The sample treated in the ring didn't freeze nearly as fast as the untreated sample, and it formed a different crystal pattern, obvious to the eye in a semi-frozen state. The ring actually alters the physical state of water. An example of how the ring's capacity to lower the freezing point of water was put to practical use involved a ranch owner friend of Slim's in western Colorado who called him one day to order a batch of rings. He told Slim that there had been a cold snap and his stock watering tanks were freezing up. Naturally, he wanted to keep them open for the animals. The rancher had found that in bitterly cold weather, up to 8 inches of ice could form overnight in every tank, and he had to chop through the ice so the animals could drink. He wanted more rings because the only part of the water that did not freeze was a 6-inch circle directly above a ring that had been left on the bottom of each tank. In this case, the rings not only served the animals, they made life much easier for the rancher. In a subsequent test, they experimented with water in a different way. Using 2 identical weights of water in a laboratory glassware, they treated the first sample with a ring for an hour and used the sample number 2 as a control. Each sample was then placed on either side of a laboratory-grade balance scale. Over a 12-hour period, the ring-treated sample weighed slightly less than the control sample. This gave them another form of comparison, and the experiment was repeated daily over a period of 6 months with only slight variations in results. Attempts to correlate this results with natural phenomena, such as the phase of the moon, produce no positive results. The experiment has been repeated in numerous locations around the globe, and the results are always the same. Experiments continued for up to 6 weeks, while the treated water sample evaporated, and at a slower rate than the untreated sample. Nevertheless, it still weighed less than the untreated sample. In other words, the greater volume weighed less than the lesser volume. It's a bit of a mystery, but the facts are there, and this phenomena can be duplicated. The ring effect appears to physically alter the structure of water. Heart trouble, a pinched nerve, and a spinal realignment. A mutual friend and research associate who had been injured in a swimming accident some 15 years earlier suffered from intermittent heart problems that caused him to be hospitalized repeatedly. Doctors could not find anything wrong with his heart, however, and it appeared as if the real trouble was coming from a pinched nerve. Whenever this man moved the wrong way, the nerve would be pinched, setting off a heart-related aberration that would put him in the hospital. Let me not have that on. Apologies, family. He also had difficulty moving his legs in the morning, because the pressure on the nerve would put his legs to sleep or paralyze them. Slim and Bill took the working on him with the early positive-negative version of the ring. On one occasion, after receiving a couple of rings as test units, the man decided to once and for all rid himself of his heart problems. Inadvertently, he placed the negative side of the ring over his heart, and it immediately stopped. About the time he hit the floor, he said, "Oops," realizing what he'd done, and quickly turned over the ring. His heart started right up again. He decided to remain on the floor for a few minutes just to pull himself together and figure out what was going on. He slipped a few rings under his back along the length of the spine and continued to lie there for about 45 minutes. At the end of this time, the entire spine went into a spontaneous realignment. Let's take a deep breath for that one. The scalar is magic, the rings are magic, and life is magic, I say. There's a divine intelligence with us all day, and the rings seem to emulate. And it's great. At the end of this time, the entire spine went into a spontaneous realignment. He could hear the snapping and popping and crackling like a Rice Krispie in the morning with milk. That wasn't part of the book, but I'm going to start reading part of the book again. Reported this to Slim and Bill by telephone. From that time until he died of natural causes 10 years later, the man was free of any heart problems. His complexion went from gray to pink. His circulation was fine, and he lived the last 10 years of his life in perfect health. Stormy weather. By this time, Slim and Bill were getting pretty excited about the results they were seeing with the rings. One afternoon, after some thunderclaps and a bit of lightning, Slim saw that a little storm was about to blow through. Most countries, people know that a gray-green tinge in the clouds can mean a tornado, and this cloud cover looked heavy and gray-green. When the lightning began to pick up, Slim grabbed a ring and moved it along his view of the storm front, sweeping it back and forth with the beam of the ring pointing right into the path of the storm. In less than a minute, the lightning in the vicinity stopped. He got on the phone and called Bill, who lived about 5 miles away, and told him what had happened. Slim told him to take a ring and to try the same thing down in his area. 15 minutes later, Bill called him back and reported that after sweeping the ring across the storm front, he had gotten exactly the same results. Bob Dratch. It was becoming clear that the ring's energy beam, easily visible to clairvoyance, was effective over a distance. After successfully averting the storm, Slim and Bill knew that they needed to get a different kind of authoritative input on exactly what the rings were all about. They decided to contact and arrange a visit with Bob Dratch. Bob has done a tremendous amount of groundbreaking work and is well known for his research into frequencies of all kinds. He had a unique instrument of his own design, known as a molecular scanner. Slim and Bill showed Bob a ring and a harmonizer, and he took time out from his extremely full research schedule to make a couple of scans of both tools. These scans resulted in a spectrum analysis of their precise frequencies and beautiful graphic printouts that resemble mandalas or crystalline structures. Much credit goes to Bob for his contributions toward the understanding of these tools. John Davis, long form. Around the same time they were working with Bob, Bill was getting some Rolfing sessions at the Rolf Institute in Boulder, Colorado. He became acquainted with a young scientist by the name of John Davis, who was attending the Rolf Institute for treatment of injuries incurred from a hit-and-run accident. John is a qualified scientist, physicist, and electronics expert. He had invented a device that could photograph any object and locate flaws in it due to differences in light quality or shadow effects. At the time Slim met John, he had a contract with the United States military to use this system to detect structural failure in aircraft. While at the Rolf Institute, John used this invention to check differences in body structure before and after a Rolfing session. Images on a computer screen showed dark spots or shadows corresponding to areas of pain or dislocation in the human body. Absence of light indicated a flaw or a painful point. Along with the shadow image, John was able to determine a spectral analysis of the computer image, allowing him to precisely identify the portion of the spectrum containing the light that his machine registered. Slim and Bill asked John to apply this instrument to a person so that they could visibly test the effects of the caduceus wound coil. A volunteer with a sore shoulder offered his services, and the computer image showed a dark shadow all around the painful area. The caduceus coil was directed at the man's shoulder from a distance of 30 feet away, and the image on the screen immediately brightened. What had been a dark spot actually began to emit light. At the same moment, the volunteer reported that the pain in his shoulder was gone and that he felt completely normal. I'm going to chime in here. I have received countless immeasurable testimonials of this exact thing about pain relief, migraine relief, headache relief, tension release. I can completely contest to this. Next, the experimenters prevailed upon John to help them do some tests on a couple of water samples, one treated with the ring and the second as a control. The untreated sample showed a low-level spectrum in the image on the screen. The treated sample showed an enormous spectrum of light, greater in quantitative output, showing not only the full visible spectrum, but also infrared and ultraviolet light. So interesting. Using a third jug of water and taking a sample of it first, they set the jug in a ring. John's device showed that a change in the water occurred instantaneously. The moment it was placed in the positive field of the ring, it began to emit light. This really excited all of them because it indicated that something about the ring caused the water to fluoresce. According to everything they could find in physics books, this effect is rather difficult to accomplish. Normally, huge amounts of energy are required to get water to fluoresce in any portion of the visible spectrum. The significance of this event is that a hard science test, using an instrument compared precisely with observations made by several of their clairvoyant friends. This marked the beginning of the joining of hard science and metaphysics. This marked the beginning of the joining of hard science and metaphysics, the point where two seemingly opposite perspectives appeared to be in agreement regarding the ring and its effects on water. Bringing together the abilities of clairvoyantly gifted individuals with output from scientific instruments has become an integral part of Slim's research. Over time, he has observed and is now quite clear about the fact that physics and metaphysics are one and the same thing. Two pieces of wire. The unfortunate incident involving the man with the bad heart demonstrated to Slim and Bill that they were playing with fire. It was too dangerous to have a ring with two polarities that could be mistaken one for the other. Rethinking the whole problem of the ring, Slim went back to the workbench in the shop and thought out the whole concept of polarity. Since they had determined that positive effects accompanied a right-hand spin, Slim took a piece of wire, doubled back on itself, putting both positive and negative polarities at each end once it was cut. With the polarities running in opposite directions, the two wires were then twisted together to the right, bent into a ring and soldered together. This made a somewhat heavier device, but testing with a pendulum revealed that it had a positive energy field on both sides. A clairvoyant confirmed this orientation. As far as Slim knows, it is not possible to test this electronically. It can be sensed by the extrasensory perception of a clairvoyant and felt by a person who is kinesthetic, but it has yet to be verified by a scientific instrument. Slim is comfortable with the clairvoyant's conclusions because they have compared favorably with the results from scientific instrumentation used in many other tests. The tensor, welcome it in. As Slim and Bill continue to explore the properties of the ring using scientific methods, many more empirical trial and error experiments were done. One of the things they realized by now was that the open center of the ring, or the plane of the ring, contains what is known as a tensor field. Slim first ran across the concept of the tensor in Geometrodynamics by John Archibald Wheeler and published by the Italian Journal of Physics in 1957. Wheeler was a physicist at Princeton University who had worked with Einstein and trained many important theoretical physicists. In this book, Wheeler described what a tensor looked like. A loop of wire dipped into a soap solution emerges with a film of soap across the empty space of the loop. According to Wheeler, this is the perfect illustration of a tensor. Complicated and complex mathematical equations proving the existence of the minimal surface accompanied the description. Slim does not completely understand the mathematics, but after years of experience with the tools and the ring in particular, he is confident that the tensor exists in the ring. It can be seen, it can be felt, and the results of the energy field projected from that surface form a cylindrical beam. The tensor appears to be the source of another kind of energy, one that as yet has no name. Whatever the source of this energy beam, it appears to create an effect over a distance. Technically speaking, the ring opening is a tensor. While the mathematical definitions of tensors are extremely complex, a tensor can be described as a distortion in a space-time gravity grid resulting from the presence of a particular geometry or shape. One of the properties of a tensor field is that it transmits and transfers energy. In one of his experiments, Slim pointed a laser beam through the ring to see if this would in any way alter the appearance of the laser. Holding the ring in his fingers, pointing the laser beam through it, and looking at the spot on the far side of the room did not alter the beam or make any visible difference. If he tipped the plane of the ring or spoke while doing the exercise, he could not discern any change in the laser spot. After a few minutes, however, as Slim held the ring, he could feel a distinct tingling sensation in his fingers. If he took the laser away, the tingling subsided in a minute or two. When he pointed the laser back into the ring, his fingers would begin tingling again. The empty space inside the ring conveyed the energy of the laser beam to the ring itself. The laser had not been directed at the circumference of the ring. It had been aimed only through the opening. This lateral transfer of energy became perceptible as a neurological response in the fingers. The tensor properties of the ring are extremely important and have a great deal to do with its effectiveness in changing conditions. The quality of the energy that is transferred is what is important, however, and that quality appears to be partially due to the precise measurements used in the ring construction. Hans Becker. Bill Ramsey, a gravity field researcher inspired by the original non-mainstream research of former General Electric engineer Greg Hodowanak, introduced Slim to Hans Becker in 1998. Bill is to be commended for his matchmaking abilities because Slim and Hans have worked successfully together ever since. Hans Becker is a genius doing cutting-edge research in his own private, rather elaborate electronics and radio laboratory. After they got acquainted, Slim sent Hans a set of the tools, a ring, a coil, a feedback loop, and a harmonizer. He asked him to put them to the test in his lab. After a week or so, Hans called Slim to say this: "This is the most amazing electrical circuit I have ever seen in my life, Slim." The output of the rings contained a broader spectrum of frequencies, from electromagnetic to scalar, than Hans had ever detected from a single source. In subsequent tests over intervening years, Hans has found that the rings are room temperature superconductors. He has also been able to prove scientifically that the energy from the ring can be transmitted across a distance of 10 to 15 miles. Rewind. He has also been able to prove, scientifically, my friends, my doubters, that the energy from the ring on my neck has been transmitted and can be transmitted across a distance of 10 to 15 miles. That's where we get the term stay beaming. According to Hans, the natural resonant frequency of the ring is 144 megahertz, exactly matching the harmonic of the speed of light, according to the calculations of Bruce Cathy, a New Zealander who researches planetary frequencies. This relationship implies that the rings resonate with the speed of light's frequencies, increasing their positive effects. So they're referring to the sacred or royal cubit, which is the 20.63 inch, which Slim originally utilized for the rings. I forgot a part here. The energy is not a radio transmission, for it does not show up on any of Hans's radio frequency bands. It represents a kind of energy that is not yet measurable or detectable by ordinary scientific instruments, aka it's at a higher level of life, consciousness, frequency, vibration than the complexity of science. I don't know. If you guys don't like me, like making this it's a little boring for me to read, so I need to add some life to it, you know? Anyways, whatever. If you want to comment, if you like it or you don't, I'll probably just continue it anyway. Boyd Bushman. Slim's father introduced Slim to Boyd Bushman. Boyd was a senior research scientist at Lockheed Martin in Dallas, with about 100 patents to his credit and a considerable background in physics and electronics. Boyd had the run of a laboratory in Dallas and did pretty much as he pleased as far as research goes. Slim passed a set of rings along to him, and Boyd verified what Hans Becker had discovered in his laboratory. In a three-way conversation between Hans, Boyd, and Slim, Boyd confirmed Hans's conclusions about the frequency range emanating from the tensor. Two independent laboratories, one official and the other private, now cross-confirm the discoveries of the other regarding electrical, electronic, and energetic aspects of the ring. Biofeedback. Another instrument that has been used to test the Light-Life tools is the biofeedback machine. Slim was given a high-quality biofeedback machine by a woman who was no longer needing it. In Bob Dratch's laboratory, they made some minor repairs and decided to check it out with the tools. Slim hooked the electrodes from the machine up to his shoulder and his wrist. From a distance of 4 feet away, Bob slowly approached him, holding a coil out towards Slim's arm. When he got about 2 feet from Slim, the buzzing signal of the meter on the machine began to indicate changes. The sensitivity indicator on a biofeedback machine has a separate knob, and as the knob is turned, the sensitivity level with which it senses and records resistance or galvanic skin response increases. If there is any resistance, the user hear a high-pitched sound. Through relaxation techniques or meditation, one can learn how to lower resistance, requiring a higher level of sensitivity on the part of the machine to maintain the needle in the 0 position or to maintain an audio signal. As Bob got closer to Slim with the coil, the needle began to move off the dial, and the sound signal was lost. Slim then began to turn the sensitivity settings to the highest levels. The closer Bob got to Slim's arm with the coil, the more it became impossible to keep the machine in balance, indicating any kind of resistance. By the time Bob was 8 or 9 inches away from Slim, there was absolutely no signal on the machine. It was almost as if Slim was a person with perfect conductivity. There was zero skin resistance. They repeated the same test several times in the course of the afternoon, and found not only that the effects of the coil reduced the galvanic skin response, but that this effect would persist for quite a period of time, with the skin resistance remaining low. The practice of biofeedback is a process of learning to relax to keep the skin resistance low and to reduce tension in the body. It is commonly used as a method to induce self-healing for certain conditions. Using the coil induces a relaxed condition and a high state of conductivity, rather than resistance, so the healing can occur. Ultraviolet. Using a state-of-the-art spectroscopic analysis system, Hans Becker determined that something about the ring caused water to emit ultraviolet radiation. Just placing a container of water in the center of a ring would, after only a short period of time, cause the water to emit light in the form of ultraviolet radiation. Ultraviolet frequencies are related to good health. The healthy body normally has mechanisms by which biophotons of ultraviolet are produced. Consuming water that emits ultraviolet has a germicidal effect and inhibits the growth and life cycle of any disease-producing organisms that might be in the body. Inside the body, water enters the cellular and intracellular fluids and the bloodstream, providing a simple mechanism for the disruption of disease-producing organisms. If we keep in mind that the body is approximately 70% water, it is easy to take this concept one step further. When a human being or an animal steps into the center of a ring, and the ring is passed up and down the length of the body, the water in the body is charged, the same way a jug of water is charged, due to the tensor properties of the ring. It seems reasonable to speculate that this would engender a spontaneous emission of ultraviolet within the bodily tissue and create a bacteriostatic or virus-static state without even touching the body. What we have then is a non-invasive method for reducing bacterial or viral infections. The early experiments with the ring supported this conclusion when the positive field of the ring enhanced suppression of bacterial and fungal organisms in petri dishes. Slim and Bill were on the right track from the beginning, but the advance of the ring technology through the use of 2 wires produced a device with nothing but positive effects. The absence of negative energy combined with the effects of the 144 MHz frequency seemed to be the key components for beneficial treatment of water with the rings, whether in vivo or in vitro. These key components also give us a clue to the effectiveness of the ring in treating various conditions. Coyote optics, Shoemaker-Levy comet, deep space telescopes. Another test done within a scientific format involved the critical observation powers of a trained specialist. There were no measuring instruments, double-blind tests, or electronics used in this particular instant, only the human eye. The human eye is a precision instrument and is finely tuned as any mechanical or electronic device. To tell this story, we have to go back to Slim's first meeting with Coyote, a master telescope builder who grinds his own lenses and builds entire telescopes from scratch in his own workshop. His skill in this craft is renowned in certain circles. Coyote's telescopes are constructed with only 3 pieces of glass in the optical system, instead of the customary 5 to 9. His approach takes the optics for deep space telescopes to a simpler level by creating higher levels of precision and analysis in the mathematics and technical aspects of producing a scope. The Shoemaker-Levy comet crash into Jupiter brought Slim and Coyote together. This astronomical event had been so long predicted that they had plenty of time to arrange a meeting to observe the event together. Coyote provided an 8-inch reflector telescope of his own construction that he used regularly for deep space work, and Slim provided a very heavy gauge wire coil. A week before the comet was to appear, Slim installed the coil around the barrel of the scope. The big telescope was mounted next to a 4-inch spotting telescope that Coyote had also built. During the earlier viewing hours on the evening of this event, they had the opportunity to observe other celestial phenomena and to compare the two telescopes. Coyote happened to mention that the smaller 4-inch spotting telescope normally showed a certain measurable amount of distortion. The larger 8-inch reflector telescope with Slim's coil on it contained Coyote's finely tuned optical systems. Due to its larger magnification, however, it could happen that there would be 8 to 10 times more distortion in it than in the smaller ones. On this night, Coyote was surprised to find 32 times less distortion in the larger deep space telescope than in the smaller spotting scope. For Coyote, this was an eye-opener. Slim recalls watching him pace back and forth in the observatory. He says he could almost see the wheels turning in Coyote's head as he considered what it might mean to design a telescope of superior quality, incorporating the rings in its construction. Unfortunately, due to the circumstances, this never happened. On the same evening, Slim took a large ring, and without touching the 8-inch scope or the coil around it, they were able to pass the plane of the ring down the length of the big telescope. Coyote was looking through the eyepiece and could see that each time the tensor field of the ring passed the loop of the coil, the focus of the image in the scope would change. Since gravity bends light, it follows that the tensor field of the ring had some bearing and relationship to the gravity field, somehow or another, and in combination with the effect of the big coil, what could be seen through the eyepiece of the telescope was that the ring actually changed the focal length of this device. There was more. In the dim light of the observatory, they could see a bluish light in the plane of the tensor that would flicker each time it passed a turn of the coil. This seemed to further prove the existence of the tensor. It also showed them that the tensor was able to affect not only the quality of materials at which it was aimed, but also the quality of light and the quality of materials over which it passed. To emit light from an empty space means there must be a spider web-like energy field, a thin, very tenuous geometric form in the plane of the ring. As this field of energy passed the loops in the coil, it stimulated the emission of a faint light. The bluish-white light appeared brightly enough to see in the dim conditions of evening light on the outskirts of the city. Since that time, the same phenomena has been replicated in darkened rooms and under many different conditions. Once the eyes got accustomed to the darkness, holding the ring at an angle to the viewer, the tensor can be readily seen by anyone with normal vision. Clairvoyant vision is unnecessary. Any viewer with ordinary vision who looks closely can see it. At their first meeting, breakfast at the Stuffer Hotel at the old Denver airport, Slim and Coyote observed the ability of the rings to change the refractive index of glass. Subsequent to this discovery, the technique was applied to a deep space telescope to observe the Shoemaker-Levy comet crash into Jupiter. The sun streaming through the dining room windows and its effect on the water glasses on the dining table gave them an opportunity to make yet another ring discovery. There were no instruments present, This discovery was made with the eyes and simple visual observation. Anyone who has had lunch with Slim knows that he always puts a ring around his water glass. The two of them could see how the prismatic effect of the sunlight coming through the glass and water painted a rainbow on the white tablecloth. Placing a second glass of water with no ring around it next to Slim's glass, it was obvious there was a distinct difference in the quality of light reflected on the cloth. The glass without a ring produced a rainbow that was fuzzy and dim. The glass with the ring around it created a prismatic effect that was sharp and clear without any distortion. This may seem like no big deal, but Slim sees and understands things on levels to which most of us are oblivious. He already knew that the energy field of the ring changed the structure and spectral output of water. The difference in the quality of reflected light on the white tablecloth showed him that the rings also have the capacity to alter the refractive index of water and glass. This may also apply to why the Deep Space Telescope showed 32 times less distortion than the smaller scope. Philip Callahan, Pete Jackson, and paramagnetism. In 2001, Pete Jackson and Phil Callahan wanted to do some scientific tests with Slim's rings. Pete Jackson does research into new technology for the Department of Defense and for industry as well. Phil Callahan is a well-known author of books on natural science. He writes about everything from the function of light to the function of various natural chemicals or scent molecules from animals and plants to paramagnetism in rocks and soils. Phil has researched these things officially as an entomologist with the Department of Agriculture and unofficially for his own interest. He has spoken at the Acres USA conference for the past 20 years. His recent book on the topic of paramagnetism and how it affects the growth of plants and agricultural crops delves into the ways in which paramagnetic substances or materials contribute to an increase in health or to a recovery in health. Slim got together with Pete and Phil in December 2000 to discuss what the two of them had discovered about the rings. Their findings verified that the rings and the coils have a very high paramagnetic value. Paramagnetism can be measured by expensive meters found in the best equipped laboratories. For reference, oxygen and certain granitic substances, like the pink Aswan granite that lines the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, have a high paramagnetic value of 3,000. Phil invented a special detector for agricultural purposes. While it is not as accurate as some of the higher cost instruments, it does provide correct and easily obtainable results, especially for testing agricultural soils. Highly paramagnetic soils are the best growing soils because they have high oxygen content and the capacity to contain sufficient quantities of water. Oxygen, having a paramagnetic value of 3,000, by itself adds to the quality and fertility of a soil already high in paramagnetism. According to the work of Fritz Albert Popp, given these conditions, the water in the soil emits light photons in the root zone, thereby contributing to reduction of the number of parasites in the soil that could adversely affect the plant. Pete and Phil rated the paramagnetism of the rings at 18,000. Pete and Philip Callahan rated the paramagnetism of the light rings at 18,000. 3,000, 6,000, 9,000, 12,000, 5,000. That's 6 times higher than what was in the Great Pyramid in the King's Chamber. Let's just sit with that. Let's let that sit for a second. This is 6 times greater than the highest naturally paramagnetic substances known. Given this information, it is easy to understand why a ring placed around a sick houseplant would cause it to revive, become green, and its leaves fill with water. Another example is given below in an early field report from a student of Slim's in Washington State. The resurrected shamrock. Slim's student had a shamrock plant that was pretty much dead. There wasn't a living shoot on it. For the sake of experiment, she watered the shamrock and placed a ring around it. Oddly enough, she positioned the ring at a 45-degree angle, and perhaps this has some bearing on the result. Within 24 hours, she was able to report to Slim that the plant had produced 4-inch shoots and was bright and green with a full crop of leaves. No one is claiming that the rings can resurrect the dead, but Slim's files are filled with similar, equally amazing stories. One of Slim's California students had placed a ring around a houseplant to bring it back to life. The plant was perched on top of a dead palm tree log that served as a pedestal. Not only did the houseplant flourish, the log sprouted leaves and put down roots. We're talking about the resurrection of a dead stick of firewood here. Perhaps there was a living cell or spark in it somewhere, because it literally came back to life. I am the resurrection and the life. These two interesting and worthy examples from Slim's archive of anecdotal reports are documented with photographs, so he has no hesitation about presenting this information. While full laboratory study to support the archive and to explore the paramagnetism of the ring are a dream that Slim might never be able to afford, many chemical, agricultural, and biological advances are potentially available to anyone willing and able to make the effort. Although there are many more of Slim's early discoveries, what's recorded here illustrates the degree of pioneering and the kind of concern that has gone into the study of the light life tools. This research began with no clear sense of where it would lead. What guided these efforts had less to do with rational thought processes than it did with a willingness to remain open to all possibilities. Late nights in the lab watching white crows and following them takes courage. It is the spiritual warrior, not the scientist in Slim, who came upon this remarkable technology. Sending you so much love, family. I hope you enjoyed Chapter 2, Ring 2. I'm going to continue with my day. I love you. Bless your heart. Bless your family. Bless your body. Bless your mind. Bless the rings. Bless all of life. And life will bless you back.